Prepare to witness a whirlwind of chess mastery as we delve into the fastest losses endured by the renowned Hikaru Nakamura. Brace yourself for lightning-fast checkmates and strategic brilliance in mere moves. Believe me, you didn't expect this at all. Hikaru vs. Magnus. In a swift and astonishing display, Magnus Carlson outmaneuvered Hikaru Nakamura, winning the game in just 6 moves. Carlson initiated with a pawn to a4, Nakamura responded with a pawn to e6. Carlson pressed on, advancing his pawn to a5, met by Nakamura's pawn on a6. Undeterred, Carlson pushed his pawn to e4, challenging Nakamura's defenses. Nakamura positioned his knight on f6, but Carlson's pawn on e5 threatened his position. Nakamura countered with knight to d5, yet Carlson's knight on f3 held strong. Nakamura's pawn to f6 captured Carlson's pawn, but little did everyone know, he surprisingly resigned, conceding defeat. Hikaru vs. Julio Becerra Rivero. In a rapid and intense game, Hikaru faces off against Julio. The Sicilian defense is employed as Hikaru opens with pawn to c5, met by Julio's pawn to e4. Both players swiftly develop their knights and establish control in the center. Hikaru's bold move with knight to d5 is met by Julio's knight to c3, leading to an exchange of pawns and pieces. Julio gains an advantage, but Hikaru counters by capturing a pawn with his bishop. Julio seizes Hikaru's pawn with his queen and presses on. Despite Hikaru's efforts to fortify his position, Julio's strategic play proves overwhelming. With a powerful move, Julio forces Hikaru's resignation, claiming victory in just 12 moves. Hikaru vs. Maxim Vishy. In the next game, Hikaru is checkmated in just 12 moves. The atmosphere is charged as Hikaru and Maxim face off, ready to engage in a battle of wits. Maxim opens with a pawn to e4, met by Hikaru's e5. The tension builds as moves unfold rapidly. Maxim's knight to c3, Hikaru's knight to c6, Maxim's f4, Hikaru capturing the pawn with e5 to f4. The battle intensifies with Maxim's knight to f3 and Hikaru's g5. Maxim strategically places his bishop on c4, countering Hikaru's g4 move. Hikaru remains relentless, capturing Maxim's knight with f3. Maxim retaliates, capturing a pawn with his bishop on c4 to f7. Hikaru maneuvers his king to safety on f7, but Maxim's queen strikes with force on f3. Hikaru presses on, moving his bishop to h6, challenging Maxim. Maxim pushes his pawn to d4, and Hikaru's knight captures the pawn on d4. Maxim's queen aggressively moves to h5, trapping Hikaru's king. Hikaru seeks refuge with his king on g7, but Maxim's bishop on f4 delivers the fatal blow. Checkmate. In just 12 moves, the game reaches its swift conclusion. Hikaru vs. David Paravian. In a swift and decisive victory, David triumphed over Hikaru in just 16 moves. David initiated the game with pawn to e4, and Hikaru responded with knight to f6. A series of tactical maneuvers followed, with David's pawn captures and Hikaru's solid defense. Both players developed their pieces, but it was David who made the crucial breakthroughs. Hikaru's position weakened as David applied pressure, and in a strategic move, Hikaru had absolutely no hope in recovery and reluctantly resigned. Hikaru vs. Bogdan Dandiac. In a thrilling chess encounter, Hikaru starts with a knight to f3, met by Bogdan's pawn to d5. Hikaru responds with a pawn to e3, and Bogdan counters with a pawn to g6. Hikaru advances his pawn to c4 while Bogdan develops his knight to f6. Hikaru captures Bogdan's pawn on d5, and Bogdan retaliates by capturing Hikaru's pawn on d5 with his knight. Hikaru pushes his pawn to d4, and Bogdan moves his bishop to g7. Hikaru continues with pawn to e4, and Bogdan maneuvers his knight to b6. Hikaru places his bishop on b5, and Bogdan places pawn to c6. Hikaru strengthens his position with bishop to e2, and Bogdan counters with pawn to c5. Bogdan captures Hikaru's bishop. Hikaru surprises the queen to d8. Bogdan captures the queen with his king. Hikaru advances his pawn to b6, and Bogdan captures the pawn. The game reaches a climax as Hikaru resigns, giving Bogdan a victory in just 18 moves. Let us know which game shocked you most.